We're all here. So good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to share with you more about the Ohio Urban Community Action Network. My name is Yvonne Sherrill, and I proudly serve as the Chief Executive Officer for the Ohio Urban Community Action Network, also known as OUCAN. OUCAN is a part of the national war against poverty as members of the Community Action Network. Community Action Partnership began in the 1960s under the Lyndon B. Johnson administration during the Civil Rights Movement. Johnson signed into executive order programs across the nation to support the least of our communities. Nationally, there are 1,000 community action agencies providing critical services for millions to low-income Americans, from early Head Start, some of you may be familiar with these programs, Head Start, to weatherization and utility assistance. In Ohio, there are approximately 48 community action agencies under the Ohio Community Action Agencies Association. And we are so proud, OUCAN, to be the home of 9 of those organizations addressing needs and support in urban and surrounding counties. In the early 1980s, community action agencies in the Northeast Ohio and across the state realized that due to Ohio's unique demographics, meaning that we have more larger urban centers than any other state in the country, that networking to address those issues collectively would be necessary. We needed an outlet, we needed a voice, and we needed leaders within the urban settings to be able to talk a little bit more about the issues that were germane to residents residing in urban counties. And so from that conversation, from that need, the Ohio Urban Resources System was born. That is our former name. So ours was born out of the need for more voices from the urban communities. And in 1985, ours was incorporated to represent the needs and the interests of Ohio urban poor families. In 2021, I am so very proud of this strong network, this historical network of institutional knowledge and services and programs to the community, that as we continue to evolve and progress and understand that the niche that we once shared now has expanded, that we now changed our name in 2021 to the Ohio Urban Community Action Network, again known as OUCAN. Now, OUCAN agencies represent 56% of the state's total population and 62% of those households that are living at or below the federal poverty level. Within our network, we seek to reduce the number of households living in poverty so that no family experiences food insecurity or housing challenges and are able to earn a livable wage. That's the work that we've been doing for more than 50 years. Over the last 3 decades, OUCAN Network has expanded to serve not only urban populations living in poverty, but also rural and suburban populations that are increasingly experiencing poverty. In 2018, OUCAN communities were home to more than 55% of all Ohioans. And today we are over 1.6 million people, poor people in Ohio, and 1 million of them live in our communities, the OUCAN communities. The poverty rate overall in Ohio is 15%, and in OUCAN communities, the areas that we serve, is 16%, where 16 of our counties out of the 88 serve the least among us. So today, the network is comprised of 9 community action agencies representing the largest urban counties. We indeed are the leading resource in strengthening the social and economic security of families and their communities. Again, our mission is to empower Ohio's Urban Community Action Network and our agencies through education, networking, and advocate for policies that alleviate poverty and promote self-sufficiency. And we do that again through the collective voice of our 9 urban community action agencies. With the support of our esteemed board of directors, we will continue to be the voice to help eradicate and end poverty for all Ohio's children and families. In 2021, the Ohio Urban Community Action Network created its first advocacy agenda to bridge together Ohio's community action agencies to again alleviate poverty and improve the lives of families in the urban community. We achieved these efforts through 3 bucket areas. 1, Oh You Can knows the importance of safe and lead-free shelter for all Ohioans. We support affordable housing programs and policies that prioritizes safe, affordable, and lead-free housing and reducing the gap in home ownership for underserved buyers. In the communities we serve, we seek to address home ownership rates specifically for Black homeowners, prospective homeowners, increasing the availability of affordable housing, the units and landlords, and fair affordable housing for renters. So we promote and advocate for affordable housing for all Ohioans. Our second advocacy agenda point is we prioritize workforce development and career pathway. We continue to support programs and policies to reduce racial disparities in wages and occupational clustering, and programs that have pipelines to career field and companies who invest in those pipelines, including entrepreneurial and social enterprise ventures. We absolutely support young, displaced, out of work, those who are transitioning into different kinds of career pathways to achieve that entrepreneurial spirit that they desire. So far too many of our qualified residents fall through the cracks simply because they don't have the access to those kinds of fields of technology or entrepreneurship. And so we continue to support that internally and working with our stakeholders. And then lastly, within our advocacy agenda, which is very important, and I think you're watching the global climate, you're watching the global crisis regarding childcare. We, as a historical institution, a proud historical institution, Head Start and Early Head Start has been around for more than 50 to 60 years. We believe in preparing children for early childhood education and childcare. So we support programs and policies that are designed to address access as well as quality and equitable funding for early childhood education and childcare. So as I mentioned before, because we have been rooted in this community, in the nationwide community for more than 50 years, we continue to demonstrate transition to kindergarten for early Head Start and Head Start children for approximately 3,700 young people every year. Annually, we graduate and transition into kindergarten readiness, 3,700 young people within our community. And I don't think I have to tell you all much about the ROI on early care and education. The return on investment in early childhood education and childcare can yield anywhere from $4 to $9 per $1 investment. Please help me understand. What other investment can you get those kinds of dividends and yield back positive results? My son, who is going to be 31 next month, is a former Head Start baby. I am a former Head Start parent, and we have done quite well because the investment in his early care and education, just that $4 to $9, has yielded a young man who is able to contribute to society financially with his critical thinking skills. So we need to continue to invest in our young people. I also want to just kind of mention that during this last year's budget cycle, Oh You Can demonstrated our leadership and our influence through press statements, through partnering with organizations like Advocates for Ohio's Future, and we were at the top of the conversation and part of the voice in Ohio's Future for Ohio's Rally Day. So let me just give you a little example of what we've been doing to make sure that all Ohioans will have the same access that they deserve.
They're only getting a bare minimum of food stamps to just eat. People should not have to choose between medication, food, housing, and just bare minimum things.
People are hurting, period, in our community, but the number of serving seniors in just 6 months, I have given out over $4,000 worth of food vouchers.
People that we service are seniors. We service about 250 families a week. The truckload that I get is anywhere between 5,000 and 9,000 pounds of food. So that's a lot of food going to the community because they don't have those resources.
Food went up, gas, transportation, all broken. We need to fix this, Ohio, immediately.
We're looking for ways now to continue to offer some type of food support for seniors and for people in our community, but mostly our seniors. And food is sky high now. Now is when they really need the assistance.
I'm working with the seniors, and it breaks my heart to see the struggle that they're going through and how dependent they are on the food and the diapers that we're able to give out.
We are so grateful for our member agency at Mahoney Youngstown Community Action Partnership for all of their efforts, all of their advocacy around senior services. And I am so happy to report, if you've been following last year during the state budget process, we were able to successfully restore more senior funding for senior programming, for seniors to be able to access health care and additional food pantries. So we are one of the leading advocacy voices in the state of Ohio. So as we move forward and we think about what does it look like for Ohio or for the Ohio Urban Community Action Network to move forward, what we want to establish and what we want to continue to build upon is our 3-year vision plan. One, to continue to establish a collective identity. We hope that you will see and you will continue to partner with us for those opportunities. Two, we are a resource generator. We continue to provide the kinds of networking opportunities, training, and resources for our members. Three, to strengthen our collaborative relationships. We are always so very happy to have you all share in this opportunity. And without our community partnerships, we wouldn't be able to expand the services for other members of our community. And then lastly, becoming a repository for network best practices. Many of our organizations are consistently improving upon the services that they provide in the community by simply looking at the model product and what can we do to expand those kind of services across the state. And so now here we are. I know you didn't come to really hear from me, although I think you don't mind talking to me, but you didn't come to hear from me today. So thank you for joining us. Today's training, board governance, purpose-driven board leadership, is really all about supporting all of our members and our partners in the nonprofit sector to successfully be able to provide board development and training for your board. So the purpose of today's training is really a training and technical assistance kind of guided conversation to make sure that we are all envisioning and evolving our board to be the kind of support systems that we need to do. Far too often, too many boards are populated in a way that limits their ability to provide the kind of values-driven strategic leadership and oversight that the organization needs. And so today you will hear from one of the experts in the field, Ms. Dani Robbins, who is a guru regarding board development and board leadership. But before we go to that, let me just remind our Community Action Agency members, as it relates to board governance, I want you to keep in mind, and we can have a conversation more in depth, but I want you to keep in mind that in the world of community action agencies, we must adhere to board governance compliance issues that are stated under the federal CSBG Act, specifically requiring us, the tripartite board of a community action agency, to participate actively in the development, the planning, and the implementation and evaluation of any CSBG funded program. So that means, my community action agency families, we need to dig a little deeper in those three main areas regarding board governance. One would be the certification of board members. So we can talk a little bit more about that, but I would like for you to visit your CSBG standards so that you can find this information. Two would be board development. And our guru, Dani Robbins, will talk a little bit more about what is included in board development and what are the strategies, successful strategies you can launch to make sure that your board is engaged properly and they are populated in committee service and other leadership opportunities. And then lastly, what are the new sunshine laws? So we can get into that a little deeper as well, community action agency staff. But for the purpose of today's training, it is definitely my pleasure to introduce to you someone who I absolutely admire, respect. Miss Dani Robbins is the Director of Governance Strategy. She leads the educational strategy for Board Source. I strongly encourage you all to Google Board Source. It's a wealth of great information for board governance. Dani works across teams to ensure that Board Source's offerings are aligned with the organization's leadership priorities, the research findings, and sector-wide leading practices. She oversees the design, the development, the implementation, and the evaluation of educational programs, including the Board Support Program, Board Sources, Core Board Development Program. Now remember, we mentioned that even in the Community Action Agency, the world, our Community Action Agency world, again, we're looking at the development, the implementation, and the evaluation of our board governance. And Dani is the one to be able to respond to that. So prior to joining Board Source, Dani served as a director of the nonprofit administration graduate programs at John Carroll University, where she taught nonprofit governance, leadership, and management. She also founded led the Nonprofit Evaluation, which is a consulting firm providing nonprofit governance, strategy, and culture services. See where I'm going with this? Only the best for you all. And then lastly, I just want to point out, not only is she incredibly beautiful and talented and super smart, Dani's education includes a master's degree in public administration from the Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University, shout out to my hometown, and a bachelor's from Kent State University, also kind of in the hometown area. She is also a graduate of Leadership Akron class of 2022, and the Boys and Girls Club of America's Advanced Leadership Program, offered in conjunction with the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Listen, Dani is the real deal. She's a speaker, she's a trainer, she's the co-author of the Innovative Leadership Workbook for Nonprofit Executives. She blogs regularly. She saves my life regularly. There's nothing that she just can't do because she truly is a superwoman of sorts. And so I, again, invite you all to go get your coffee, go get your latte, go get your snacks, because we are indeed in for a great treat. And it is my pleasure to have my friend and the board governance guru to join us today, Ms. Dani Robbins. It's all on you, Sister Robbins, and welcome. If I had the whole hand clap sound effect, I would give it to you, but just know that we absolutely appreciate you being here. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you. And y'all, let me just tell you, I cannot live up to that. So I will do my best, but lower your standards a little bit, because I don't know if I could get where Yvonne just sent me, but I will try. How's that? Can you hear me okay, Yvonne? Yvonne, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes,
Okay,
we can hear
good.
you, Dani. I'm sorry. You may not be able to see us. Yes, we can hear you.
I can't, yeah. So I'm going to share my screen. And then we're going to jump on in. And then Yvonne, will you do the chat for me? So will you manage to chat for me, please?
Yes, and Sharon is on as well. So we have you covered, Dani. It's all on you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be with you all today. And for those of you who were at the last session I did many years ago, I'm delighted to see you. So again, my name is Dani Robbins. I'm the Director of Governance as Board Source. Here's my very quick bio, which Yvonne was amazing in illustrating. So I'll just jump in. So the first thing I want to ask you, and you could use the chat or you could say it out loud, whatever rules Yvonne set up before I got here. To whom is a nonprofit accountable? Will you just read them? They come in the chat, or if people want to jump in.
So far we only have one comment, which is me. And I said that we are accountable to the board of directors and our constituents.
Board of directors.
Another participant said the board and the community.
Okay, board and the community.
Someone else said the funders. Can you see now, Dani? Okay.
Yeah, keep reading though, if you would. Funders, board and the community, staff. I think I heard staff. Anyone else?
They're still acting a little shy, Dani. Just hold on. Sometimes they do that. Okay, here we go. Here's another great one. Stakeholders as a whole, people we serve, the staff, funders, and everyone.
Yes, that is an excellent answer. So one of the reasons I always start with this question, and then my next question is it different from whom it serves? Because a lot of people don't include the people we serve into whom a nonprofit are accountable. But I would argue that they are the people to whom we are the most accountable. Right? Yes, we have we owe a debt to the community, to our donors. We have an obligation to our board. We have laws we have to follow. We have rules we're expected to uphold. But who we serve is our primary people to whom we're accountable. So here's my next question. Which profile, and I know y'all are a little different because what I came here to talk to you today about is purpose-driven board leadership. And I know Community Action has been doing some of the pieces of purpose-driven board leadership all along. But for the most part, outside of your organization or even in your organization, which profile of board members do you see the most on nonprofit boards you know well? So you can put that in the chat if you would, please. And as Yvonne said, I've been a professor and I came out of the Boys and Girls Club movement, so we can wait. So come along, don't make me just talk for an hour and join in. Which profile of board members do you see the most on nonprofit boards you know well? Who are they? You want anybody playing with our chat?
Okay, they're coming in, Dani. So we see so far corporate.
Okay.
Corporate is huge. Accounting and those in fundraising. Business and banks.
Okay, business, banks, corporate, fundraising.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grassroots and activists.
Ooh, grassroots activists don't usually make the list. Nice.
That was from one of our favorite community partners, who is also a high-profile advocate in the state of Ohio, Ms. Rosa Betra. So yeah, there's no wonder why we got that response.
That's right. It's a good answer.
Yes.
No wonder at all. Anyone else? What do they usually look like?
So far, there's one response, mine. White male. Now it's another response, white men. Older, retired white males.
Yeah, that's what they look like, right? They're generally white. They're often male. They're generally wealthy, right? Even though the vast majority of communities are not white, wealthy male. Which means that we have boards who are making decisions for communities that they don't know, aren't from, and may never go to. So one of the things I want to talk about is who we're putting on our boards, right? We can't build a board anymore if we ever could, and I would argue that we shouldn't have even then, with all white, wealthy men, right? Because who board members are and the perspectives and expertise they bring greatly changes what the board understands its role to be, and then how that board decides and prioritizes for their organization. So you could see how a group of bank tellers would make very different decisions than a group of hairdressers, than a group of business people or insurance people or lawyers, right? Because we don't want just one type of people on our board. Our boards represent our community and we want them to look like and reflect our community. So the board has really 10 roles, and those come under setting direction and strategy, ensuring resources, and providing oversight. So let's talk through them. The first one is the duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. And those are under the law. I'm sorry,
Dani,
Yvonne. Yes, ma'am.
yeah, I apologize. I'm sorry. Your
That's okay. I
slides,
love questions.
oh no, your slides aren't advancing. I believe that you may be
Oh.
speaking with the advancement of your
I
slides.
am.
So
No.
one at the very top, if you want to enable your editing so that you can move forward, and two, we haven't been following with the slides.
Ooh, well, let me start again because the slides are good. I made them myself. When you say embedding with when I share my slides, you're saying I should stop sharing and embedding?
No, you don't have to. No, just maybe hit your slideshow or just continue to advance while you're speaking.
Doing that.
So
if
we're
it wasn't
on,
more-
yeah, the slide that we see now is, okay.
Is it moving now?
Hold on, it's coming up. No, we're on the very first slide. It's still the title page.
Okay, what if I
Purpose-driven
do
board.
it like this? Can you see this?
Yes, we can see you
Okay,
advancing.
then
Yes.
I'll just
So
leave it
this-
like this, if that's okay.
Okay, so it's on the board's essentials, board's
Yes.
essential roles. Okay.
Yes. So if it's okay, sorry, it won't be as pretty, but you'll be able to see, so probably worth it. All right, so thank you for interrupting me. I appreciate that. And I would much rather we have a conversation than I lecture for an hour. So if you have questions or comments, I would welcome that as I go. So again, the board has duties under the law, right? So duty of care, loyalty, and obedience, because I know we're all from Ohio. In Ohio, that's called compliance, duty of compliance. So let's walk through them really fast. The duty of care is that you would treat your organization the way you would treat your own business or your own money, right? So you're not making decisions that are in conflict with that, or making decisions that don't uphold what a prudent person would do under similar circumstances. The duty of loyalty is a baked-in conflict of interest policy. So you are obliged under the law to disclose conflicts of interest, to not vote on things that are benefit you, your family, or your company, and that you manage the relationship between the organization and yourself in a way that's responsible and ethical. And then the duty of obedience is obedience to the law, your policies, and donor intent. So if the law says X, you don't get to change your mind. So when I ran the Boys and Girls Club in Akron, we carried $152 that a donor gave us to buy a lawnmower that we didn't need because we were in a housing development, right? That's honoring the duty of compliance because that's donor intent. Now, does that make sense that we carried $152? In certain worlds, no, but we carried it because that's what it was given to us for. And frankly, we probably shouldn't have taken it. But since we did, we had to figure out a way to buy a lawnmower. And in fact, we gave the money to the Urban League to buy a lawnmower, or maybe we bought a lawnmower for the Urban League because they needed a lawnmower and we did not. So you are obliged under the law to honor the laws of the state and the feds and the county and city, if there are different laws, and also your own policies, as well as donor intent. Oversight also includes technical skills in financial and legal oversight. Everyone doesn't have to have that, but the board as a whole has to have it. We also want you to pay attention to information and processes, but from a distance and without control of execution or implementation. I used to teach a class that we referred to that as noses in, fingers out. Right, so we don't want the board micromanaging, but we do want the board paying attention to information and processes. Any questions on oversight?
No questions, Dani, but one more time. I'm not sure if the slides are advancing. If I don't know.
Well, I haven't moved them. So
Okay,
if you
great.
can see
Okay, I just want to make
oversight
sure.
and-
Okay, great.
Can
Okay.
you see the 3 bullets under oversight?
Yes, we're on the
Okay,
same
perfect.
page now. Okay,
All
great.
right, then I'm going to move on to ensuring resources, and I'm going to click the button and hopefully you'll see those bullets too. Can you see them?
Yep, I think we're back on track now. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. So ensuring resources, the board is responsible for ensuring resources. That means that they hire, and we mean resources in the broadest context, right? So confidently select and support a capable chief executive. Now, you may call that executive director, you may call that CEO, you may call that chief executive, but that the board is responsible for confidently selecting and supporting a capable CEO. They need to understand financial strategy and the business model. And every nonprofit is a different business model. So just because you understand one doesn't mean you understand another one. And have the ability to bring resources, connections to the organization through networks. Now, we used to leave it at that. And when I say we, I mean we consultants, we professors, we board source to some degree, right? We talked a lot about oversight and resources. We talk, every board member needs to raise money. Well, some board members need to raise money, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we really want you to also be setting direction and strategy. Boards have to have commitment to the mission and the collective purpose of the organization. They have to understand the priority areas of the work and the communities we serve. Remember back to my question, is it the same as who we serve? It is, or it should be. They need to cultivate an ability to make sense of the information that they get and think strategically as a collective. So those are the basic rules and responsibilities of a board. Before I keep going, does anyone have any questions about anything I've covered so far?
Looks like there are no questions in the chat so far, Dani.
All right, let's keep it going then. So again, we used to only focus on these two, right? Safeguarding and sustaining the organization, but you really need all three to leverage organizational assets for impact. If you don't know where you're going, any direction will get you there, right? But you're not going to get too far. We want you to be super intentional as leaders to make sure that you are stewarding your organization towards sustaining and advancing its mission and supporting the collective purpose of the organization and its ecosystem. So we are just at the outside of finishing our most recent Leading with Intent. So this is from the last set a couple of years ago. So where boards were today. And it's a lot of what you said when we started, right? Disconnected from the communities and people that they serve. 49% of chief execs said they didn't have the right board members to establish trust in the communities they serve. 32% place a high priority on knowledge of community served. So that means more than half, right? More than half of our boards don't know the communities in which our organizations operate. Ill-informed about the ecosystems. 25% of boards prioritize knowledge of the organization's work in field in board recruitment, and 11% prioritize prior or current experience. So that means that 75% and almost 90% don't, right? Lacking in racial and ethnic diversity, and I'm really excited about these numbers coming in, but we don't have them yet. But the last time, 78% of board members are white, and 19% of boards are entirely white and preoccupied with fundraising above all else. This is actually one of the few that we do have crunched, our numbers crunched, and for the first time, boards have started setting strategic direction ahead of fundraising, and we're very excited about that. So I will keep you posted on where our data crunchers come up with, but we are moving forward, but that's where we were last time. So those are pretty striking numbers and not dissimilar from where we started our talk today. So that is a big opportunity for us, right? We can change things. Once you know where you are, you have the opportunity to go a different way. Now, this is set inside of the Governance as Leadership framework, which I love. It's from a book called Governance as Leadership. Governance as Leadership. And it really sets the board's roles and responsibilities inside different ways of thinking. Right? And fiduciary is the price of admission to good governance, right? You got to start there, and you can't get to the other two until you're solid on that, right? But the board has an oversight role. Are we doing what we said we would do? What did we say we would do? Did we do it? And do we have the right systems and controls to make sure that we're taking care of business? But then the next is strategy. What impact do we want to have in the next 5 years? How should we prepare for significant change that we're facing as an organization? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? How do we know that's the right way to get there? And then how do we know that we did it once we do? The generative is all about the right questions, right? It's about what our values are. It's about how we move those values through the world. It's about what we care about and what we're working towards in partnership with our sister organizations to advance the collective purpose. how do we make sense of things? How do we know that what we're doing is right? And how do we even know that what we think is true is true? I spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues about how do we know that, right? Like just because we've always thought that, like how do we know that that's still right? Generative is a lot of time thinking about like what's the right question, because we can spend a lot of time on the wrong question. But what's the question? It's called the generative curve, the power of early stage sense making. Hopefully you can see my mouse moving around. But right here is where we really struggle with things, right? We put them on the table, we toss and turn about them, we argue with our colleagues. You know, we're making sense of what's happening and we're framing the problem. The challenge is the we doing this is usually staff, right? Because if we have boards who don't know enough about our world, bringing them in may not get us where we want to go, but we want them there because we want to tap the entire intellectual capital of everyone we have access to get the right, to make sense of things, to frame the right problem, to ask the right questions, and to create strategies and policies that will get us where we want to go. So if we don't bring our board in here and don't bring our board in here, then we bring our board in at execution. So we, the staff, the executive leadership team usually, has spent a lot of time figuring things out, and then they bring it to the board with a recommendation, right? And the board may or may not approve that recommendation. But what if we started earlier? What if we built the right board who knew our communities, who represented our entire community, and they helped us make sense and frame the problem. And then they helped us set strategy and policies around the problem. We would have a completely different framework. It's the power of a different angle. If you're in New York City, you can see the street, you can hear the noise, you can see people walking, maybe bumping into you, you can see a lot of cars and a few buildings, right? But if you go up to the top of one of those buildings, you could see the Hudson, you could see into Westchester. It's kind of quiet, right? It's a completely different lens for the same place. So I'm here today to talk to you about purpose-driven board leadership, which is the next outside framing of both the roles and responsibilities of the board and governance as leadership and the leadership modes we talked about. We want the board to focus on the organizational purpose versus the organization itself, to center the board's role in strategy and direction setting, to identify principles and mindsets that are integral to embodying the strategic role, and to envision a new way of being for boards, both in role, orientation, and composition. Yvonne, I'm gonna take a breath and see if you have any questions coming in.
So far, we don't have one, but I was framing one for you. So I wanted to ask you, how do we generate that kind of support to transition to the power of that framework for a more purpose-driven board leadership? As you mentioned before, many of us commented, boards are oftentimes comprised of members of the community that we don't serve.
Yes.
And that is by the right. So what are there other ways that we could begin to build on? How do we get the board that we deserve for the people that we serve?
Yes. Yes, I'm going to answer that, and we'll keep talking about that, but that's the question, right? I mean, it's all about like, how do we build the board that we need to get where we want to go? So I'm going to keep talking, but you let me know if I get there by the end, okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
So, you know, we really, and the answer, and Rose is going to laugh because she's heard me say this a million times. The answer is intentionally, right? So intentionally is the way we do all things as nonprofit leaders, intentionally. But even once you've made the intent, like, how do you really do it? So, you know, you figure out what the right questions are. What's our purpose? What problem are we trying to solve? What new reality are we trying to create? Why were we founded and why do we exist today? And what's the why for us doing this work, right? So there's 4 principles of purpose-driven board leadership, and I'm going to walk through each of them in some detail. And the first is purpose before organization, which is going to sound antithetical to most of you, but stay with me. It's the idea of prioritizing the organization's purpose versus the organization itself. It's really a reframing of the duty of loyalty. And I got to tell you, I did this talk for the National Attorney General's tax exempt staff, and they were not crazy about the reframing of the duty of loyalty, but they got there with me, because the duty of loyalty, our organizations don't exist to perpetuate themselves. right? Like if our organization, if Rosa succeeds beyond her wildest imagination and manages to eliminate sexual assault in Ohio, like her organization doesn't need to exist because she has done what she set out to do. That doesn't mean that the duty of loyalty means that she says, oh, well, let's fight against that because we have this duty to maintain an organization above all else. That's not what it says. That's not the intent, right? It moves the organization away from viewing itself as the center of its own gravity and focuses on refocusing on its purpose and how it can best steward its resources in service to that purpose. So the March of Dimes, right? Kids used to die from polio. A lot of kids, right? Long-term damaging, I can't think of the right word, but disabilities from polio. Many people died from polio, right? Then there was a polio vaccine. What was the March of Dimes to do? They could have shut down, right? Because they had met their goal and they could have shut down. They could have fought the vaccine because the vaccine would have required them to go out of business and they have a duty of loyalty. But again, that was not the point of the duty of loyalty. They could have expanded to include other birth defects, changed their mission, and advanced their purpose, which is what they did, right? So the duty of loyalty was never intended that we put organization above everything. The duty of loyalty is about we hold the organization sacred, but to do the work. We don't exist to perpetuate our organizations. We exist to make sure the work gets done. So that's one. It evolves from what's best for our organization to what's best for the desired social outcome we seek. It's a different question because remember, the key question is the way that you reframe the work. What's the right question? Respect for ecosystem. It's defined by the acknowledgement that the organization's actions can positively or negatively impact its surrounding ecosystem and a commitment to being respectful and responsible ecosystem player. So it requires boards to have knowledge and perspective of the organization's role as part of a collection of organizations working to address societal change and impacts. It considers the impact of the actions on the ecosystem as part of decision-making process. And people in this field lean towards being competitive with other people in our ecosystem, but we're not competing against each other. We're competing against being our best selves and our best leaders. So consider, there's a scenario on the screen, but I'm going to tell you one that I lived. So I used to run the Boys and Girls Clubs in Akron. Hey, Malcolm, if you're on the call. And there was a Goodwill in the neighborhood. And Goodwill, in case any of you are not familiar, has nothing to do with Boys and Girls Clubs. We don't serve the same people. You know, the only thing we really had in common was we were in the same neighborhood. So Goodwill had a vintage fashion show. And the exec of Goodwill called me and said, hey, would you model in the Goodwill fashion show? To which I said, sure. And then all these people came up to me afterwards and said, I can't believe you're modeling in the Goodwill fashion show. That Goodwill is your competition. Well, again, there is no world that Goodwill is actually my competition. But even if they were, right, I took calls all the time from Big Brothers Big Sisters exec and their board chair, because I believe that we respect the ecosystem and that social justice is advanced collectively. We go from how would this impact our organization to how would this impact all the players and dynamics within our ecosystem? Will it help us as an ecosystem do the most good? All right, I'm going to breathe. Yvonne, any questions?
Not so far, Dani.
All right, y'all are going to get out of here early if no one has any questions. It's just going to be me talking.
This is not normally a shy bunch. They make
I know.
You're so thorough. It's not normally a shy bunch, but you're so thorough. So let's keep educating the folks.
Bring some questions, though. If you have them, it'll be much more interesting for everyone. All right, so the third one is an equity mindset, right? A commitment to advancing equitable outcomes and interrogating and avoiding the ways in which an organization's strategies and work may reinforce systemic inequities. It has to be applied across a number of areas: an equitable allocation of resources, programmatic oversight that can capture disparate impacts based on race and other demographics, diverse and inclusive board composition. So here's my equity mindset scenario. And this actually happens a lot, especially when you have large organizations that work in, the one in my head is not the one on the screen. The one on my head is this, though. There are large organizations who operate in a lot of neighborhoods, and on paper, they look very diverse, right? But when you really drill down, very segregated, right? So they're diverse in the aggregate, but when you drill down, they're very segregated at the program level. So this program in this neighborhood has all Black families. This program in this neighborhood has all white families. And there may also be different and disparate outcomes based on the programmings in different neighborhoods. But you wouldn't know that if you were only looking at the aggregate. So the scenario here is an organization has a very diverse staff, and I know you've all have seen this, but when you look at individual roles, the leadership is entirely white and the direct service staff is primarily Black. The board interrogated the hiring practices to ensure a more diverse pool of candidates for all levels of leadership and created procedures, plans, and policies to avoid potential glass cliff situations for senior leaders. And the glass cliff refers to a first leader of color following a white leader, and what happens often in those scenarios, because white leaders in our country at this time get more of a runway, more general operating, and more time to make mistakes. And when leaders of color come in following white leaders, they get less of all of those things and sometimes fall off a cliff. They're also held to a different standard as far as addressing DEI issues. So they're at a significant disadvantage based on just on race alone and coming into an organization. So we're working hard at BoardSource to help leaders avoid the glass cliff. And we have some materials coming out soon, but we also have a lot on our website on that. All right, questions, Yvonne?
No questions yet, but I do want to ask, so when we think about the equity mindset, and we appreciate your example of when it doesn't align in the aggregate, when you look at the aggregated kind of information. So again, what the board leadership may look like versus the staff, so on and so forth. What are some other areas or maybe blind spots within the equity mindset that oftentimes get overlooked? Are there some other spaces that, as we talk about board governance, that we need to also prepare not only our board, but as you mentioned before in the data, looking at leadership, those type of things? Is there some other blind spots that we need to be mindful of when we think about the equity mindset?
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of things, especially about money, right? Like when you look at who gets a credit card and who doesn't, who's given grace with receipts and who's not. When you look at, one of the things I love about BoardSource is they're like working at BoardSource is they're super intentional about how they think about equity and equity mindset. So for us, we have lunches periodically. Like we might do something as a group virtually, and then everyone is given $25 to get lunch so that they can participate in this. And they always say, like, if you don't have 25 extra dollars, let us know and we'll make sure we get you a gift certificate or we order it for you. Right when I was at the university, there were a lot of people who had to put out money for reimbursements, and then they waited a month or two to get their reimbursements back. Like, that's very inequitable for people who are struggling financially. So it's not just racial. There's lots of ways inequity comes up. And there's lots of places that we could look, which is why we're really encouraging everyone interrogate all their practices and make sure that they're creating places where everyone can thrive.
Well, and that's very important for the community action agencies and the world of community action agencies, because our boards are also comprised of community members. And so many of our community members, to your point, may not have the kind of access to, again, if it means just submitting their reimbursement for a lunch, that can be a tedious task. It could be very, off-putting for a lot of the board members that serve on our agencies because they may not necessarily have access. Are there some other tactical ways that we can make sure that, again, when we're thinking about equity mindset, that maybe we want to shift some of our practices to make sure that it is available and accessible to everyone?
Right. And just that, right? I mean, it is financial and it is racial, but it's also other things, right? Like if you're having meetings at 7:30 in the morning, who can come to those meetings? People who are not responsible for getting their kids to school, right? So if we want parents to come to that, we have to be clear that we're going to set up systems and create times and maybe things on a bus route and all of the pieces that we are constantly questioning, constantly interrogating the systems that we're creating and making sure that they are available and welcoming to the most people we can manage. And not just that, right? Like also people who can't hear well, who can't walk well, who can't, who have issues of blindness or hearing issues or any of the issues. So really intentionality about creating systems that people can thrive in instead of be stymied by. Good question, Yvonne. All right, the fourth one is authorized voice and power, right? And again, community actions have done this forever, right? Like you've historically had not just a third of the people you serve on your board, but also I love the third and the explanation that went with it about elected officials and their appointments, so that there's a second democratic way to have authorized voice on your board. So well done. But a recognition that organizational power and voice has to be authorized by those impacted by the organization's work. Our sector for far too long has done things for people without people, right? There are examples everywhere about decisions that got made by a group of people who don't have lived experience thinking about what someone who needs something, what they need and how they're going to get it, right? So organizational decisions need to be made within the context of real understanding of communities' assets, needs, preferences, and aspirations, and a requirement to listen to community needs and experience and to share power by inviting those individuals with relevant lived experience on the board. And I don't mean that we have a program and then we put people on our board and then they become clients later so that they meet this criteria, right? And I'm not saying community action does that, but I have heard of other organizations that do it, right? We want the other way. We want people who actually have the lived experience to come on the board, not board members to get the lived experience. So a primarily white, exclusive, upper and middle class board led an organization serving Hispanic Latino children in a neighborhood in which none of them lived. Board meetings were held in the law firm of the treasurer. The children began to question, the chair of the board began to question what their deliberations were missing and if their lack of community knowledge impacted the choices they saw and the ones they selected. He began to consider if different conversations would be held if the board included members of the community served, and put together a committee to find out. The committee recommended changes to their board recruitment process to ensure a more diverse pool of candidates, including former service recipients, as well as neighborhood leaders, and a policy for the board to ensure board members of color are included and embraced in committee leadership as well as officers, right? So it's not enough that you create a diverse board. You have to create a diverse board that's inclusive and that everyone feels valued. Because we want to move from what do we think is best without any conversation about who the we are and how that we informs our perspective towards, are we as a board populated in a way that ensures our power is held by the community impacted by our work, and that we are doing all we can to understand what our programmatic stakeholders tell us is most important. So we're trying to reframe the orientation to board service. So going from board service operates in service to an organization that advances the public good, and the board is responsible for sustaining and supporting the organization in service to its mission, to boards operating in service to the public good. The board being primarily responsible for stewarding organizational capacities in a way that maximize positive impact in service to that core purpose or cause. Questions, comments?
We still don't have any questions right now, Dani, but let me ask you another question regarding this framing of the board's role.
Okay.
So as we mentioned before, for many of our community action agencies, if you will, or maybe for other organizations like the advocacy organization that Rosa runs, our board can also be very small, or maybe they don't necessarily have all of the resources to be able to truly imagine their purpose-driven board leadership. Again, are there some ways that as we make that transition, that you have some ideas for how do we enter into this space where we're being more intentional, to your point, and being able to frame that kind of role for board members, even if it doesn't necessarily mean we have all of the tools or resources readily available for them. But are there some other incremental steps or things like that that we may approach to make sure that they have what they need to be good stewards of the board?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't mean to imply that like there's a final checklist and we're done, right? I mean, this is work, right? Board, this is greatness, right? If you're going to get to greatness, you don't get there and you're like, all right, I'm done, we're good, right? Like greatness has to continue to be cultivated, and this is messy, and you come in different places, and different boards come in different places, and then try different things, and you keep going, right? So it's like leadership. You're never great at leadership, so you stop learning. You just keep trying, but you do it intentionally, right? So if you feel like your board is too white, if you feel like your board isn't representative of the different socioeconomic ecosystems in your community, if you feel like you need more lived experience on the board, right? So you want to take, and we have some resources on our website called a strategic board matrix, I think, board composition matrix, that will help you sort of map out who's currently on your board, which then helps you figure out who's missing, right? And then you think about how you fill who's missing, and you keep going. But there's some pretty good there's a pretty good map on how to do that and how to figure it out. But it is really about thinking through what we want and how do we get to what we want, because different boards are going to have different wants and different values, different expectations. But it's really important that I want to make sure everyone hears me say, like, there's no finish line, right? It's like parenting, right? Like you just keep going. So keep trying, keep working, keep holding up, the core purpose and the collective purpose and the goals of your organization, and keep trying to move towards that with the understanding that there's no end goal. There's just continual evolution.
Can
So
I
there is
piggyback off
another
that?
good-
I'm sorry.
Now we're
Yvonne.
talking.
Can I piggyback off that question or comment, especially for EDs, right? And recognizing that board engagement, as well as they're your boss, right? Period.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have that meaningful conversation about restructuring without feeling that your position would be in jeopardy, right? Like,
Right.
you have to restructure completely the board, and having those intentional conversations without feeling that you're going to be fired.
Right. No,
for
that's a
bringing
great
those things
question.
up.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rosa. That's a great question. So I think you need champions, right? So like you never want to pick a fight with your board. Very few people, although one of your board members won that fight, and props to you, Jackie Chisholm. But for the most part, right, you don't want to pick a fight with your board if you don't have to, but you do want to move them towards where they want to go, or where you think they need to go. So some of that is to create champions. And if you can't create champions on the board, then champions in donors or board members or other influential people who can reach out to the board, who will then help you build the board. But you're right, Rosa, and I would not recommend that you try to turn over the board overnight. But I would recommend that you try to figure out who can help you get that done and start laying the foundation to do it. And I would sometimes like drop ideas and then let them simmer for a while, and then come back and bring them up again, and then let them simmer for a while and then come back. And so it's not an overnight thing, but it is really important that you build a core of people who want to go where you think the organization needs to go, right? Because leadership is hard, and executive leadership is especially hard. And the more you can have a solid relationship with your board, and the more you can be united and strategic in the direction that you're setting, the happier you'll be, the happier they'll be, both with you and in their own work, and the more likely you are to advance the collective action you're trying to advance. But it's hard.
So of course, Rosa would give us that great question. So before you move on, Dani, I think that we have like one really awesome comment and then an awesome question. So one of the comments, piggybacking off of Rosa's, power to the people, because we love her for that. The CEO and the board chair relationships are critical to the process of intentionality of mapping. Would you agree, Dani? That was a good comment in our chat.
are critical to the mapping?
Yeah, intentionality of mapping.
Let me hear it one more. Yeah, I think I would agree, but let's hear the rest of it.
Well, that was it. See, the CEO and the board chair's relationships are
Yes,
critical to the
Yes.
process of
Yes.
intentionality of mapping.
yes. And intentionality of everything, right? Like that's a relationship that can kill you, right? Or can help you, exceed all expectations.
Absolutely. And then there's another question about the CAAs, the Community Action Agencies. So as CAAs, our question is, how do we empower our low-income board members to utilize their voice when sometimes they don't feel their voice matters?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a real, I think that's real. And I think you have to create, first of all, you have to treat everyone with dignity, right? Like I've seen, and this has been a while, but I've seen organizations long before I got to Board Source that had policies that they had service recipients on the board, and those service recipients never said a word, right? Like they sat at those board meetings silent for the entire time they were on that board. And that's not what we want, right? The whole point of lived experience and authorized voice and power is that you participate, but also that we create a culture that you feel safe to participate and that we appreciate your participation, right? So it can't be that we put one person on the board and then we shut them down when they say something and they never say anything again, right? Like we have to create a culture that they feel valued, they feel appreciated, and they feel like they belong for people to be able to participate at all. And same for me, same for you, same for all of us, right? Like if I go to a meeting and I get shot down and I feel inadequate, like I'm done talking, right? Like, so we need to be really intentional about how we take feedback, how we hear people's questions, how we respond to people, and create a culture in which they feel valued, appreciated, and where their voice can be heard. Questions, Yvonne, or should I keep going?
You can keep going. You can keep
All right,
going.
let's do
Thank
it.
you.
My pleasure. So, so I want you to reflect on your board, right? What aspect of the board's role drives your board recruitment strategy? What aspects of the board's role drives your board meeting agendas? This is my favorite question. You ready? If you were to define the board's role based on who your board is and where it spends its time, what would that definition look like? And what does that all bring up for you in terms of insight and reflections? So this is an exercise on reframing for purpose. So the left side is how we used to talk about things. What have we accomplished? How do we grow our budget? Who are our competitors? Because you know how I feel about competitors, right? Who are our competitors? How do we get more program participants? What skills and expertise do we need on the board? Should we expand our programs into a new arena, a new area? And where do we want to be in 5 years? So that's how we used to talk about things. So if you all would like, because I think we have enough time, you could pick one of these questions and reframe it for purpose-driven board leadership. And I want to be clear, I don't want you to just find different adjectives to ask the same question. I want you to ask a new question that gets at the same thing, but reframes it to be in service to the collective purpose of your organization and using the framework of purpose-driven board leadership. Do you all want to play my game?
Yes.
Okay. I'll give you a couple minutes then. And you can pick whatever question you want. So it doesn't have to be the first one. It doesn't have to be all of them. Any question you'd like.
Well, I'll get the ball rolling while we're still waiting for other folks. And I will say that I'm going to take on number 3. And I remember a new frame way of thinking, which would say, instead of who are our competitors, where do we lead, support, or partner?
Okay.
So for OUCAN as a leading anti-poverty voice in our community, we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to recreate some of our advocacy areas or efforts. We have plenty of partners who are maybe the leaders in early care and education. Maybe we have some partners who are leaders in workforce development. And so there would be an opportunity, instead of looking at our external stakeholders and community partners as competitors, where can we find ourselves leading the anti-poverty work? Where are we partners in the anti-poverty work? Or where are we are supporters. Maybe it's just lending our name or signing a petition or something like that.
Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else want to go? I can see you're all thinking.
I'll go.
you.
I think looking at the question number 6, should we expand our programs into a new area? They could be looking at our community surveys and looking at what people need and taking like aggregate data and seeing what people are saying that they need, and looking at what we already offer and what's working and what's not working, and coming up with new ideas about programming that could possibly benefit the community based on the community members who are on the board, and ideas that they hear around town, because I get a lot of calls from board members already about information from people that they know, saying that what can we do for these people? And really there's not a lot that can be done because we don't have programs that can accommodate that. So those are things that could be discussed at those board meetings.
Good, thank you. Last chance, anyone else want to play? So here are my answers, the official board source answers. So the reframe is, what did we make possible as a result of our commitment to purpose and our partnership with others, which is some of what Yvonne said earlier. How do we grow our impact, and what will it take from us and others? Who is operating within our ecosystem, and how does our work interact and complement each other? Also what Yvonne said earlier. To understand our community's need, which is what Jennifer just said, and what evidence do we have of that, right? Like, how do you know? Just because you think something doesn't necessarily make it true. If we were to disaggregate programmatic evaluations or feedback loops by race or other demographic, what would they reveal? Who do we need to be as a leadership body to earn the trust, confidence, and respect of those we seek to partner with and those we seek to serve? Are we the best organization to do this? And sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay, right? Like, just because there's a need in the community doesn't mean that you have to fill that need if you're not the right person to the organization to fill that need. So are we the best organization? How do we know? And are there organizations that are doing good work in this area that if we choose to dip our toe in, we will disrupt? And finally, where do we want our community or cause to be in 5 years? And what will it take from ourselves and others to get there? I see some head shaking, so I'm glad about that. So what I really want you to think about is rethinking the way you recruit your board members, right? Because we used to think that we needed, and I started by saying this a while ago, right? Fundraising and oversight. And we do, but we don't only need funds, right? We need everyone to have a commitment to the mission, purpose, and the people in the community served by our organization, right? We need everyone to have the reputational capital to cultivate trust among community stakeholders. We need everyone to have the time and energy to fulfill their board responsibilities and their board commitments, and to have relational skills to operate collectively, effectively in the collective, because board leadership is a team sport, right? There is no I in board. So you have to be able to operate in the collective. The board speaks with one voice and through its mission, through its minutes. So what do we need from most people? We need grounded insight and perspectives about the work the organization does and the people in the communities it serves. A deep understanding of our programmatic and business model, understanding of the ecosystems in which we operate, and ability to connect the organization with individuals, organizations, and communities of influence all over the place and all over the community, right? Policymakers, programmatic partners, community leaders, and donors. We need from some people the ability to provide specialized expertise in areas of relevance to legal, financial, and employment oversight, and the ability to connect the organization with big donors or funders. But not everyone, just some. Questions about that? Comments, pushback?
We do have a question about it, and as you know, with especially within the community action ecosystem, if you will, it's a little bit more prescribed. But
Right.
when we think about recruiting new board members, we know that many groups are struggling to find those warm bodies, let alone people who could meet those kind of criteria. We know, you and I both know, that Michael Corey over at the Human Service Chamber of Franklin County has done an amazing job of creating a recruitment strategy that has been serving well. Do you have any other ideas on how do we find these people? How do we find them, Dani? What do we need to kind of change some of our recruitment practices, our approaches? Do we need to start looking at, you know, to your point about equity, looking at different kinds of organizations where we can get a more real run? So do you have any suggestions for us? How do we find these folks?
Yes. So the answer is yes, but and also like we also have to change our speech. I don't mean change, I mean the speech that we give on why you should be a board member, and we have to change our board meetings because we spend a lot of time talking about problems at board meetings, right? We recruit people for mission, and then we spend our time with our board members talking about problems, and problems are not engaging, right? Problems are important, and I don't mean to say you shouldn't be bringing problems to your board, because you should, but it also can't be the only thing we talk about. So when I was a consultant and I would go in and do a strategic plan, invariably, every single time, someone would come up to me and say, I am so glad to be talking about strategy and so sick of talking about the roof or fundraising or whatever it is that whatever problem they, you know, was reoccurring for their organization. So I think we have to change all of it. We have to change the way we recruit. We have to change where we recruit. We have to change what we think a board member looks like, but we also have to change the way our board works, because fiduciary is the price of admission, but it's not engaging. So you have to do it, and it's really important, and I want you to do it, but I also don't want it to be all you do, right? I want you to have strategic conversations. I want you to have generative conversations. I want you to figure out the key questions and ask them. I want you to know how your values play in the community and that what your budget reflects of your values, right? And I want you to answer the questions about if if we were deciding what board leadership looked like based on what our board looks like and what they talk about, like what would be our definition? Because key questions and generative and strategic conversations are engaging and interesting. And it's what people think board work is going to look like. And it's not talking about the building or the fundraising or whatever. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to look in different places and change our framework about who we think a board member looks like, but also about how we conduct our board meetings and how we treat our board members and how we interact with them and how they interact with each other. Like the number of times I've been in boardrooms when I was a consultant that people were introducing themselves to each other shocked me, right? Like if you don't know your colleagues on a board, you're probably not having particularly safe, strategic, generative conversations, right? You're probably only talking about fiduciary conversations. So board members need to know each other, and they need to spend time together, and you need to build those ties so they can do the hard work that it is to change our communities, which is what we're ultimately after. Does that answer your question? It was a lot of.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
All right, good question, and I appreciate it because it's real, right? Jim Taylor, who left right before I got here, and I'm sad, and is now at the Urban Institute. But his quote is, if our board composition is a reflection of whose trust we consider to be most important, which stakeholders are we prioritizing and who are we leaving out? So since we still have a few minutes, I know it's been a pretty quiet group today, but think about like what resonated with you. Where do you have questions, concerns, or pushback, and about what would you like to know more? And you can just take a few minutes and write it down on your own if you're feeling shy. Or you can share with the group if you'd like to.
So I don't think we have any. We were waiting for some more questions, Dani. I think.
I have a question, and
Oh,
I'll
I'm sorry,
ask it.
Rosa.
One of the things that I've noticed, Dani, with some boards or members is they have good intentions, but the impact is not always there, or the commitment, or they're coming especially to nonprofit organizations with a savior mentality. That we want to save this organization from the red, from the hole, or do a different branding. What happens when the organization is not there, when we don't need you to save, we need you to govern, right? And them owning that, right? So we don't need you in the daily operations. That's why you hire an ED. So how do you engage with different community partners, especially for us from a statewide perspective, to engage the right people and to be committed again to the mission and the purpose of the organization without thinking, we're going to get you out of the red and I'm in this organization because we were able to go ahead and do that. I'm like, no, you hire me so that we're not in the red, right? So and I've seen that in a lot of boards that are conformed by the same list that was mentioned about bankers and all of this, that they're committed to these organizations because they have this cape or savior mentalities. But the organizations that don't need saving and we just need them to serve with intentionality and impact, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to recruit and retain them. How do we do that?
Right. So I guess I would start with longer conversations before we ever put someone on the board, right? Like, why are you interested in serving on this board? Because I think, whoever said earlier about warm bodies, I think there are some organizations who really do recruit for warm bodies, right? And, especially if it's warm bodies in a big checkbook, even, all the better. But we really don't want warm bodies on the board. Right? We really want people who care about our mission, who want to help us advance the organization and want to work for justice, right? And if that's where you are, then that's a very different conversation that we're having before we ever, vote on you as a board member. So I think some of that is, similar to when you hire, Rosa, and you ask people a lot of values questions about, how you handle, like, what are your goals for this organization, and how do you handle feedback, and how do you work on a team, and what's the time that you got negative feedback and how you handled it. Like, the more we know our people before we hire them or put them on a board, the less that will happen, right? But it also means that we have to listen to each other, right? Because if I come to you and say, if I once had a board member who wanted to put on someone who just had a reputation for really being a bully, and I really was trying to avoid that, and I did everything I could come up with to not have that person on the board, and I was totally outvoted, and thankfully the guy said no. But I think you have to hear people. So if somebody comes to you as the chair of the board development committee and says, hey, I really have some concerns about this person, right? They have a reputation for being a bully or being grabby with women or being, disrespectful to certain communities, right? Like, we have to listen to that. And anyone who, like, the funny thing about saviors, though, Rosa, is they often give themselves away, right? So if we might hear that in the answers if we ask the right question. So my long answer is really a short answer, which is spend more time before we put people on the board and ask a lot of values-based questions so you really know who you're bringing on. And also, they know that you don't need saved, right? They know that you need supported. They know that you need governed. They know what those words mean, and that they want to join you in advancing justice for your organization and its ecosystem. Other questions, comments? I think I have one or two more slides that are probably also questions and comments. Here you go, more questions. So here's some questions for you to think about as you move forward. And they really could be really interesting generative conversations with your board or with your board development committee. And so those of you who I know on the call, like you've probably heard me say this before, right? Feel free to blame me on any of this. Like, hey, I went to this webinar and Dani Robbins said blah, blah, blah. And, let's have that conversation. She recommended that we get the board together to have this conversation. So blame me. Does your board have the perspectives, expertise, connections, and access needed to operate in a purpose-driven manner across all three modes of governance? Does your board understand its purpose and role in relationship to management? So that's what Rosa's talking about, right? I don't need you to save me. I need you to govern. Like, this is my job, right? My job is to do the work. Your job is to set the strategy and do the, have the governance and generative and strategic conversations, and honor your fiduciary duties and all of those things. Does your board structure their time together to allow for purpose-driven, meaningful engagement in important work, right? We could get a lot done at a board meeting in a consent agenda if your board is actually going to read the things in the consent agenda in advance, right? If they're not, your board could get in a lot of trouble. But, we want them to read it in advance, come with questions if they have it, and then you'll have to pull something out of the consent agenda. But that will free up a lot of time that you don't need to talk about things that have already happened. Right? You should never put a finance statement in the consent agenda, just so I've said it. But you want your board to have more strategic and more generative conversations. Do they structure their time to allow for that? Does your board's culture encourage thoughtful, purpose-driven deliberation that is inclusive of all? Right? If you have former service recipients or current service recipients on the board and they never say a word, like, we got to figure out why. Right? Have we taught them that we don't value them? Or are they scared, right? And if they're scared, what can we do to address that? And if we've taught them, like, what can we do to fix ourselves so that we can teach them that we value them? So think about what aspects of purpose-driven board leadership will feel natural to your board and what they might resist, and then what you're willing to try. Questions, comments before my last slide?
Yes, Dani, before your last slide. So, there's a question, and I'm also going to add to it. So the question is, we hear a lot that board members don't read the information that is given to them prior to board meetings and things like that. Seriously, how do we get them to do that, Dani? Now that's question one. But the second part of that, when if you can go back to that last slide, it was a question regarding the meaningful engagement important to a work and how structuring that, because it goes into how you get them to read information in advance, but how do we create opportunities for that kind of meaningful work? Because sometimes what we find out is that board members, to your point, the development director or the chair of the development committee or the chair of the nominated committee may notice some trends that may be happening and they need to share it. Maybe it is something that is a kind of a pause or a pivot within the organization, but it needs to be shared. But how do you create space for them to have that meaningful dialogue and engagement, so that, because it could be something that could be a part of us, an awareness, or maybe we may need to do a new campaign. So how do we get them to read and look at the information in advance, but then how do we create those meaningful engagement opportunities that might really serve the organization well?
So some of it is the board chair and the board chair and the governance committee chair setting expectations of what the work is going to look like, right? Because you can't, and as we started earlier, the exec can't fight all these battles and put out all these fires. And frankly, you don't want to, because it's not your job, right? We want the board to fulfill the role of the board. So the way the board does that is reading materials, right? That is a basic expectation of board leadership, is you read the materials in advance before you walk in the room. So if you're not getting that, then that's something that your chair or your governance chair should be addressing on how that has to happen, how imperative that is, and what a liability it is to the organization and to the board by not doing that, right? So, directors and officers and liability insurance covers people doing their work. When you're not doing the work, you're generally not covered in the same way. You with me? Part two of that is the more we can build to, the more we can ask what people want and then figure out how to get to what they want, the more the other things come along, right? So if I, as a board member, want to have strategic and generative conversations, and I, as the chair of the fundraising committee, really want to talk about the trends that we're seeing, and how those trends are going to impact the organization. All right, I have to create a culture that we can have time for that. And if that means that I then have to, bug the chair of the development committee, I'm the chair of the governance committee, and the chair of the board to create an expectation that people read things in advance and come prepared to have conversations, then that's what I need to do. Right. So it has to be a collective effort of working towards better process, better boards, better engagement, better board meetings. And it's hard. But it's also really worthwhile, because otherwise, this is so not enjoyable. Right? 3 years of serving on a board where all we do is talk about problems and read reports of things that have already happened, that's not interesting. Making the world better is interesting. Making the world better is engaging. If I came on the board to make the world better, that's what I want to do. So we have to figure out how to set up systems to make sure that that's what I get to do.
Thank you, Dani. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, so that is all I have, and look at that, it's almost 2:00. So I would happily accept any of your feedback, things on the deck that you thought weren't clear, any questions, and I would love to hear from you if you try it. So my phone number is on the board, my email is on the board, and we have tons and tons of resources, free resources, and then even more resources if you're a member. But please let me, and I'm over all the resources. So if you find a resource that you think is awesome, I'd love to hear about it. If you find one that you think doesn't hit it, I'd love to hear it. And if you can't find one that you think we need in the field, I'd love to hear about that too.
Are there any other questions for Dani? Let me just say this one more time. Dani is absolutely a board governance guru. You heard what I was able to share about her background. I mean, it still doesn't do her any service at all, because she's just magnificent. So, again, if you have any additional questions, let Sharon and I know. You can easily put it in the chat. You can direct message us. You can send us a text or an email or whatever the case may be. Sharon has also offered the board source link in the chat. So as Dani mentioned before, I get the newsletters and the updated information, and it is extremely helpful. So I strongly encourage everyone that's on the today's call, please get this information downloaded. I also want to take a quick moment just to say thank you to You Can board members. There's a number of our board members that are on today's call. Rodney Reasonover, Sheila Triplett, thank you so much. And there's also additional board members. Dr. McGee, Vigil McGee, we are so happy to also have you, a longtime board member for MyCap. We appreciate you being here. And this is what it's all about. This is exactly what it's all about, Dani. You are generating the interest of board members so that we can continue to make the Community Action Network a stronger community. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Dani, for your time. Just so you all know, Dani, we're pretty special because Dani is in DC. She's doing her thing in DC, but she agreed to talk with us today to make sure that we are compliant and that we are looking at different ways to have a more purpose-driven board leadership, and we appreciate that. As we close, again, if you have any additional questions, let us know. Today's training is being recorded, so we will offer the recording for you at a later time. And Sharon has also offered information for our upcoming Women's Leadership Symposium on March 14th. So kind of grab that registration information, because again, we're going to keep doing what You Can does. And that is, being able to empower our Community Action Network through education, networking, and advocating for policies that alleviate poverty and advance and promote self-sufficiency. Dani, you are amazing, sister. You never disappoint. Thank you for your time. I can't wait till we have some more faux when you get back.
Thank you.
Everyone else, thank you for your afternoon. We appreciate it. Hope you grab some great nuggets. And we will see you at the March 14th Women's Leadership Symposium. Have a wonderful, wonderful Tuesday, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye, y'all. Thanks for having me.